G'day guys, my name is Caleb, otherwise known as the Critic Kebab, and today we're going to be reviewing Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame, one of the biggest movies of all time, has finally been released. It's once again directed by Anthony and Joe Russo and is the direct follow-up to Avengers Infinity War. Just a reminder, there will be no spoilers for this movie until after I've given my grade. I can promise you there will be no spoilers. In saying that, let's get into my spoiler-free part of the review. The basic story for this movie is that the remaining Avengers must process their grief after Thanos snapped his fingers and erased 50% of all life in the universe. Against all the odds, they must work together and figure out a solution and combat the problem in the best way possible. Whatever it takes. This is the final chapter in the Infinity Saga, the culmination of 22 movies and concluding all three phases of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Me personally, as someone who's invested my love and care into these characters and their stories, I could not be more satisfied with this movie. This is the perfect culmination that lives up to the hype. The team of filmmakers at Marvel Studios deserve all the praise because they have accomplished one of the most outstanding achievements in film history. If you are a fan who's been following along over the last 11 years, I can guarantee you will not be disappointed. Now, I can't explain too much of what happens in this movie, but all I'll say is that I loved it and was never bored. The film goes for 3 hours and it never drags. The MCU has earned a 3-hour runtime and they do not waste a minute of screen time. I think the character development in this film especially is some of the best we've seen in the MCU. Hawkeye and Black Widow get some of the most interesting and complex characterization. And Karen Gillan, who plays Nebula, is at her best in this film. She's fantastic. The various character dynamics are all well deserved. They've been well set up and here they are fully paid off. And it's very satisfying seeing certain characters back together again, as well as seeing some characters interact with each other for the first time. Captain Marvel is of course in this movie, and she only has a small role, but everything they did with her was fantastic in my opinion. Now, whilst Thanos is in this movie, he is not the main focus like he was in Infinity War. This movie has its own distinct feel and style compared to Infinity War, because it focuses on the core Avengers from the first Avengers movie, and everything that is done with them is truly incredible. The movie perfectly balances all the emotional moments throughout the story, and includes great scenes and character moments that will become iconic in pop culture. The stakes are incredibly high, and this leaves you on the edge of your seat. Of course, there's that typical Marvel humor, and in my opinion, all of it was great. When the movie wants you to laugh, you laugh. When the movie wants you to cry, you cry. When it wants you to be happy, sad, excited, scared, or inspired, it succeeds in doing so. The Russo brothers did an exceptional job once again of directing this movie and balancing all the moving parts, and translating beautiful superhero literature to screen. The visual effects and action sequences are not only thrilling, but epic in scale. There are also moments in this movie that fans have been waiting for a long time, and they deliver them in the best ways possible. This is a movie-going experience that will leave you fulfilled, especially if you've been following along over the last 11 years. With great action sequences, intense drama, and outstanding character development, this might be one of the best MCU movies. Despite its 3-hour runtime, this is a cinema experience you need to have. For me personally, this was the most fulfilling and satisfying movie-going experiences I've ever had in my life. I've only seen it once, but in my humble opinion, this is the perfect conclusion to this epic superhero story that I absolutely love. I'm gonna give Avengers Endgame an A+, and of course I recommend this movie. I know the review is a bit vague, but trust me, this is a movie you must see. This is the series finale to a cinematic, serialized universe that has evolved into the biggest and most successful film franchise of all time. And as a fan, I got the best fan service. Now, if you haven't seen it yet, I implore you, go see this movie and avoid all the spoilers. However, if you have seen it, stick around because I'm going to get into my spoiler chat, where I discuss all the spoilers in this movie, so make sure you're sticking around. However, if you haven't seen it, click off this video now. There is so much crazy stuff that happened in this movie, it will take me forever to go through it all. So I'm just going to go through the moments that really stood out to me. Now, whilst I do think this is a perfect superhero movie, it does deal with time travel, and obviously with time travel that is a very abstract concept and it's not very well defined all the time. And in this movie they obviously address a lot of other previous movies that have dealt with time travel, like Terminator and Back to the Future and all that type of stuff. And whilst a lot of those movies are great, some of the time travel doesn't always make sense. So for me personally, there's nothing glaring and obvious that stands out after only seeing it once. But for me personally, if there are any inconsistencies in the timeline or the time travel rules that are established in this movie, to be honest, it doesn't really bother me, because time travel is one of those things where if it's done well and there's no obvious or ridiculous problems with it, then you just go along with the story and you just enjoy the ride. And for me personally, there was nothing obvious that didn't make sense, and I just absolutely loved the way they incorporated time travel in this movie. Let's get straight into it. And a lot of us had speculated that we would be seeing the dusting of Hawkeye's family in this movie. And that's exactly how it opens. Obviously, Clint is doing archery practice with his daughter, and obviously his whole family just turns to dust. This was a really, hard-hitting beginning to this movie that, again, just connects the dots from Infinity War to Endgame, and obviously, gets you back in that mood, that emotion, and really obviously sets up Hawkeye's character arc in this movie. One of the big speculation points was that how was Tony and Nebula going to escape from space? And a lot of our speculation came true. Obviously, Captain Marvel finds Tony and brings them back to Earth. Tony says that they've been up there in space for about 22 days. So I think that makes sense that, since the end of Infinity War, when Captain Marvel comes through in that post-credit scene at the end of her movie, it's been about 22 days of her searching for Tony and Nebula in space. So I think that's relatively justified. This obviously leads the team of Avengers to the planet where Thanos has been, chilling out and doing his farming and relaxing. They obviously, take him down, and then it's discovered that Thanos destroyed the Infinity Stones with the other Infinity Stones. And this was a crazy thing that they did. I'm so glad that they did this, because now this isn't going to be a plot thread that can be addressed in the later MCU movies, because the Infinity Stones are now just gone. But obviously in this, Thanos just gets his head completely chopped off by Thor, which I thought was fantastic. He went for the head, a great comedic moment. And after this is where you transition into that 5 years later. And from this time until where we pick up with them later, it really shows you how each of the characters really deals with loss, how they deal with their grief, and how certain characters really adapt to this new life situation where 50% of all life has been erased. Ant-Man also makes his return 5 years later, and when he is going through the streets and stuff, it is really like a ghost town, that very post-apocalyptic sort of environment. And obviously he makes his way home, and he discovers his daughter, Cassie Lang, has obviously grown up. It's been 5 years. And I'm really excited to see what they do with the Cassie Lang character in the future of the MCU. Because in the comics, she obviously does become a superhero. So whether they continue with that approach, I'm interested to see. But regardless, this was a really heartbreaking moment to see, Scott come out of the quantum realm and see his daughter all grown up. Speaking of heartbreaking, one of the things I did not expect in this movie for them to do was they gave Tony and Pepper a daughter. And this was so emotionally resonant, because Tony Stark as a character has really changed so much over this franchise, and now to see him as a father and to have all these extra stakes now added onto him in this movie was really dramatic. And I thought they did a great job of incorporating those funny and heartwarming scenes with those two characters. And I'm so glad that Pepper obviously had a big part in this movie as well, especially towards the end, which we'll get to. Now, one of the big things that I predicted in this movie was that we would get like a Professor Hulk type character. And in this movie, that's exactly kind of what we got. Bruce Banner and the Hulk are kind of working together now, and they're sharing parts of the brain and the body and that type of stuff. And I thought this was so great, seeing these two entities working together. I thought it was fantastic. The humor they incorporated with it, and obviously just seeing Bruce Banner in Hulk-like form and using his intelligence in the ways that he does. I thought it was fantastic. And as a character arc for Bruce Banner specifically and the Hulk over Thor Ragnarok, Infinity War, and now this movie, I thought this was a very satisfying character arc that they included with this character. As I mentioned in my review, there is lots of satisfying stuff in this movie. And obviously, if you've seen Captain America Civil War, you would know that Steve Rogers, dropped the shield and has, kind of dropped the mantle of Captain America. And in this movie, Tony Stark brings his new shield and gives it back to Captain America. And I just absolutely love this moment, this kind of reconciliation between these two characters. And this was super satisfying, him donning the mantle of Captain America once again. Now, this might be a moment of contention between some of the fans, but for me personally, I did not expect at all to have a fat Thor in this movie. I thought the comedy they weaved into this was so funny. I absolutely loved it, and I thought the way they incorporated obviously Korg and Meek from Thor Ragnarok as well, I thought was so clever, so hilarious, and that ultimate payoff, because I really wanted to see those characters in this movie, and seeing them here with a fat Thor, a character that has really lost all hope and has basically become a drunk. I thought it was very good, and it really showcases you what Thor has gone through, because he's lost his father, his mother, his brother, his best friend, like so many of his people. Thor has really lost a lot. Plus, obviously, after the events of Infinity War, he is in really a dark place. So I thought this was a really funny way of injecting some humor into this movie through this character that has really undergone a really depressing and heartbreaking tragedy. And whilst I did not expect it, some people may not like it, but for me personally, I thought what they did was fantastic. Now, because we are in my spoiler chat, I can kind of get more into the story details. And one of the things I absolutely love about the story in this is obviously because we have Ant-Man involved with the Avengers, we have that idea of a time heist. And I thought this was so clever. Obviously, the Avengers creating that time travel machine and then going back through history, through the events that we've seen in the previous MCU movies. And obviously, having this heist and stealing the Infinity Stones from that time and bringing them back to the future. I thought this was so clever. I absolutely love this idea, this concept, and the way they handled it. I thought they did a great job with. And because this is the culmination of everything that we've seen in the MCU, we have so many fantastic moments and so many great cameos as well. Obviously, Bruce Banner goes back and sees the Ancient One from Doctor Strange. I thought this was so great, bringing Tilda Swinton back. Obviously, he then has that conversation and eventually acquires the Time Stone. We also had that elevator scene with Captain America, with the Hydra guys as well, which I thought was so fantastic when Captain America leaned over and was like, "Hail Hydra." So great. A nice little nod to the comics as well, when Captain America did have that small stint where he was, part of Hydra and evil and stuff. So I thought that was a great little nod to that. But the way they handled the scene was so fantastic. A great callback to Winter Soldier. And obviously during this time heist, we go through the various events, and obviously the main one is where the Power Stone is, which we see obviously with Guardians of the Galaxy, and Rhodey and Nebula are tasked with acquiring that. And it was so hilarious seeing that opening scene from Guardians of the Galaxy from that different perspective, because obviously Peter Quill is listening and dancing to the music, but in reality, that's exactly how it would unfold. It's, obviously the outside people would not be able to hear the music and wouldn't really understand. So I thought this was hilarious. Obviously, Rhodey just slaps Peter Quill, knocks him out, and then they eventually acquire the Power Stone. Now, coming into this movie, I was really intrigued to see how Thanos would be brought back into this story. Because at the end of Infinity War, he had a fantastic and satisfying character arc. He accomplished everything he wanted to. And in this movie, it is revealed that obviously because there are two nebulas in the same time, that creates like a double consciousness. And there are two sets of memories, essentially connected to the same server, and essentially the cloud. And through that, Thanos and Gamora and Nebula discover the plan and everything that's going on with this time heist. And that's what get Thanos' involvement back into this story. And I thought this was a really great plot twist that they included that really raised the stakes, that extra level that obviously got Thanos back involved with the Infinity Stones. Another super satisfying moment was when Tony went back to the 1970s with Cap. We had that very brief cameo with Hank Pym. That was really cool. But one of the most satisfying moments was when Tony meets up with his father Howard, and they have those conversations and stuff. This was a really fulfilling moment because obviously Tony and his father, they never really had a great relationship, But just to see this last moment of reconciliation between these two characters, even though obviously they don't, like obviously Howard doesn't know who he is, but I thought this was a fantastic moment, and it really reinforces obviously what happens with Tony at the end of the movie, because has been Tony Stark's journey over the last 11 years, and I thought this was a really touching and heartwarming scene between father and son. Next up, obviously Natasha and Clint go to Vormir, where the Soul Stone is. And as an audience member, it was one of those daunting moments of having that realization that one of them will need to sacrifice themselves in order to get the Soul Stone. But obviously the characters don't know that yet, and once they come to that realization, I thought the scene played out just absolutely beautifully. It was really hard to watch. It was really, really depressing. And once Black Widow eventually does, make it over the cliff, it was just a super sad moment, and it really kind of thrust the movie up another gear, because again, that's just one of these characters that has died in this movie, and I was just did not expect it at all, but the way they handled that sequence in particular, with obviously Red Skull there as well, which is again really cool, just really, really, really depressing. Also, another moment that I really loved was when Thor went back in time and had that very brief encounter with his mother. This was another great moment that kind of gave his character especially some closure, because obviously in Thor the Dark World, that's when his mother was killed by the Dark Elf, and this little scene between Frigga and Thor was again super satisfying, because it just gave you that closure that you didn't get in the Dark World. And I thought the way Chris Hemsworth handled the scene, and obviously the actress that plays Frigga, they played it so well. And obviously we had that very brief cameo of Natalie Portman in this movie as well, which I thought was super cool, bringing her back into the MCU. But yeah, this was another moment that I thought was really satisfying. And obviously from there, Rocket gets the ether, the reality stone, and then they transport back in time. Eventually, once all the Infinity Stones are brought back together again, it made perfect sense that Bruce Banner and the Hulk would be the one to put on the gauntlet and snap his fingers and try and reverse everything. Because obviously the Hulk is very resilient to a lot of damage, and obviously has had that encounter with gamma radiation and all that as well. And as we see, like, humans by themselves are not powerful enough to undertake the power from the Infinity Stones, and we see that later on in the movie. But so I thought it made perfect sense that Hulk was the one to snap his fingers and try and reverse everything, despite the amount of power and energy that he would be enduring in this moment. But of course, this specific moment thrusts us in to the final battle sequence, which was completely epic in scale, super satisfying. Like, for me, I have dreamt about all the MCU heroes fighting in one epic battle sequence, and I could not be more satisfied with this epic scale, large, beautifully crafted action sequence that really culminated in the best way possible. 22 movies, 11 years, all culminating to this one battle sequence, and to have Captain America scream "Avengers Assemble" for the first time, so satisfying. Again, this is one of those moments that fans have been waiting for so long, and to finally get this moment of "Avengers Assemble" could not be more satisfying. Also, one of the moments that was seeded in Age of Ultron, in that amazing dinner party scene, was when Captain America tried to lift up Mjolnir and had that little bit of a wiggle, and Thor was like, "Ooh, what's going on there?" And in this movie, we get the ultimate payoff of Captain America being worthy and wielding Mjolnir and just absolutely wrecking shop with the hammer and his shield. That was so awesome. Some of the best action I've ever seen in my life, especially him going toe-to-toe with Thanos, was truly incredible. I absolutely loved it, and again, one of the best payoffs we've had in the MCU. One of the other super satisfying scenes in this movie was when we had all the female superheroes from the MCU come together, assemble, and fight together. This was truly awesome. Seeing every single character from the various movies that we've seen, all of them coming together and just having these badass female superheroes fighting on screen was just so satisfying and just pure awesomeness. And within this final battle sequence, we have this moment with Thanos where he comes to that realization that what he did was an actual mistake, and his new motivation is to get the stones and completely erase this entire universe and start from scratch. And I thought this was a really crazy moment, because essentially what he's trying to do is become a god, like the god we're familiar with. with the whole creation story from the Bible. And I thought this was a really cool concept to introduce in this moment, and obviously it really sets you on the stakes for the rest of this battle sequence. And obviously through this we get so much great action, so many great character moments, and the way they culminated it at the end and was just so satisfying. Because we have that final confrontation between Tony Stark and Thanos. Doctor Strange gave him the finger, this is the one. And we have that really dramatic, heartbreaking ending of Tony Stark, where he steals the Infinity Stones from the Gauntlet, puts them into his own armor, wields the 6 Infinity Stones, snaps his fingers, and erases all of the bad guys in this area. And this was just the most awesome moment of him saying, "I am Iron Man." The most satisfying and badass line, and one of the best ways to conclude the character of Tony Stark in these movies, because the Tony Stark character has been my favorite in the MCU, and to see him go from this cocky, selfish arms dealer in the first Iron Man movie, and to see his journey all the way up until Endgame, and to see that he is willing to sacrifice himself for the universe, that is one of the most crazy and amazing story arcs in pop culture. And I absolutely love the Tony Stark character, and he will be missed. After the battle sequence concludes, we then transition into the funeral for Tony Stark, and this was just, again, super heartbreaking. It just got everyone in the theater super emotional. Lots of tears were shed. I can tell you right now, for pretty much the last 40 minutes of this movie, I was crying and sobbing non-stop. Just tears of joy, tears of surprise, tears of sadness, all of it. This was the perfect conclusion to this movie and to this chapter in the MCU. And the funeral was super satisfying. Especially at the end, we have that very brief shot of Harley, the small boy from Iron Man 3, the same actor, came in at the end for that very brief cameo. So that character was Harley from Iron Man 3. That was a super cool moment to see him at the funeral. And just obviously seeing all of the characters we've had in the MCU there for him in his memory. And then obviously the last man being Nick Fury, the man that started us all with, the Avengers initiative. And this was just a perfect ending to this character, to this story, and to this, franchise overall. Again, couldn't be more satisfied. And of course, after the heartbreaking funeral, we have that moment with Steve Rogers when he goes back in time and puts all the Infinity Stones back where they belong in time, which again, I'm pretty sure makes the timeline then smooth out and makes sense so that everything we've seen before continues as it was. But like many of us predicted, that this ending for Steve Rogers, I think, is the most perfect and poetic ending to this character. Him obviously staying back in time and living out the rest of his life with Peggy Carter. And this was just such a beautiful romantic moment between these two characters that obviously loved each other, but then it was stolen away from them when Steve went into the ice. And this was such a poetic and great ending to this character. And to see him come back in modern times as an old Steve Rogers and hand over the shield and hand over the mantle of Captain America to Sam Wilson, again, just super satisfying. This is stuff that fans have been looking forward to for a very long time, and it just played out all in the best ways possible. And the fact that we had Tony Stark die in this movie and in such a great way, and then to see Steve Rogers kind of conclude his chapter in this franchise again in just such a satisfying way. It was a beautiful way, and the Russo brothers and the Marcus and McFeely, the writers for these movies, they all just came together and crafted the best superhero experience that concludes everything we've seen in the past. And I know I've said it multiple times, but I could not be more satisfied. This movie is definitely one of the best MCU movies. The action sequences, the drama, the dialogue, the character development, all of it is truly fantastic, and it really deserves and earns the 3-hour runtime that it gets. And for me personally, I was just super happy with everything we got to see in this movie, and I would love to hear what you guys thought of this movie down in the comments below. Did you love it as much as I did? What were your thoughts overall? Because this movie delivered everything the fans have been wanting for so long. Like, people often say fan service and it has a negative connotation, but this movie gave us all the best fan service, but through the best story possible. And like I said, it just all comes together in the most perfect way possible. Well, those are my thoughts on what most certainly will be one of the biggest movies of all time, Avengers Endgame. If you like this review, make sure you go down, hit that like button. I really appreciate it. And if you are new to the channel, make sure you click subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my future content. Again, it really helps out the channel. I just want to say thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in another video.